What's going on, YouTube? Welcome back, everyone. This is Lee, and yes, today we'll be talking about this Sirui 40mm T1.8 anamorphic lens for the Nikon Z mount. So, with all that said, let's begin. So right before we get started, I just want to first point out that Sirui, they did send a sample over to me for evaluation, and as usual, all opinions are my own opinions about the product. And also, I usually have another lens to compare it to, but this is going to be a solo review because I don't normally get anamorphic in the studio, so this is the first of its kind. And with all that out the way, let's take a look at the price and specs. So the Sirui will run you roughly around 800 USD. This is a full metal build. This is an APS-C Super 35 lens, and also this comes in at T1.8 to T22 aperture with 16 elements in 12 groups. One is spherical, 5 cylindrical elements, and it has 11 blades. And by the way, this is autofocus lens for anamorphic, which is kind of rare out there. And the minimum focus distance is 60 centimeters. There's no IS. And also, the anamorphic is 1.33x, and it has a 77mm filter thread. It can hold a 80mm matte box on top of the lens. And by the way, this lens comes in with 2-year warranty. Now, let's take a look at some quick features. Now, as for some features, the lens weighs about 679 grams. The front focus ring is quite smooth. There's no hard stops. It's fly-by-wire. There's an AFL button and autofocus to manual focus switch. Also, if you take a look at the other side of the lens, there is an on-off click for the aperture. And if you take a look at the rear of the lens, there's a USB-C port for firmware update and a rubber gasket. So with all those features out the way, let's take a look at our first test. Now, as for our first test, this is the vignetting test. And I will say, I don't see any harsh vignetting at all on this lens. So that is pretty cool to see. I guess you could just add on the vignetting if you need some in post, but this lens does not come with any vignetting. And as for distortion, this lens do have slight distortion, as you can see on this graph. It does bow just a little bit. And here's what my blinds look like. You can see the same bow as well. So it does bow just a little bit. Now, as for the bokeh ball test at T1.8, as you can see, the bokeh balls looks quite like a hexagon or hexagonal. But once you stop it down to a 2.4 or 2.8, you start getting a elliptical bokeh, as you can see, and it just works its way down. So that is a feature you will get from this lens. Now, in terms of focus breathing, there is slight focus breathing on this lens, but it is not that bad. Now, as for chromatic aberration, I actually don't see much from this lens. As you can see in the scene, the sun is hitting this tool, the metal piece, the white base. I don't see much happening when it comes to chromatic aberration. If there is, it's very subtle. So just want to throw that out there. There's no crazy chromatic aberration from this lens. Now, when it comes to sharpness, on the edges, the left and right side seems to be slightly soft. The center looks great. You don't want it to look overly sharp like a photo lens because this is an anamorphic video lens. And when it comes to 5.6 to f8, everything seems to be all in focus. So there we go. And as for flares, there's two different flavors. There's a blue flare and neutral flare. I have the neutral flare, and as you can see in this test scene, it depends on the intensity of the light. If it's not that intense, you're not able to see the flare. See, these cars are coming close to me. I don't see much of the flare. However, if you do see a intense light, you will see the flare. So if you really want to activate the flare in the lens, you need a very intense light. It doesn't matter the distance. It just depends on the intensity, right? So there you go. Look at the sun. The sun is far away, but if the intensity is there, you can see the flare. So there we go. Now, as for this next test, this is the compression test. I'm 15 feet away from this tree bark, and you guys get to see the compression that this lens offers. You get to see the background, midground, and foreground. And definitely keep in mind, the background is very deep in the back. So just want to give you guys an idea when you're out there filming at a subject that's roughly around 15 feet away, this is the kind of result you will end up getting. Now, here is the second part of the compression test. I'm roughly around 6 feet closer to this tree bark. or is this a tree bark or a brand? I don't know what is this anymore. When I think of tree bark, I think of a big lump of tree, but whatever this particular thing is, it's 6 feet away from me. You guys get to see the background, the midground, the sharpness at the center of the lens. This is the overall lens compression you would get if you're filming someone 6 feet away. And here is the last portion of the outdoor compression test. I'm roughly around 3 feet away from my subject, and as you can see, the background gets a little bit more blurrier as you get closer to your subject, and you could see the center sharpness a bit more on this lens. And so if you're filming someone 3 feet away, this is what you'll end up getting in terms of overall background blur compression from the lens. So there we go. And side note, I'm using a variable ND and it's a cloudy day out there. So there we go. And for this indoor compression test, I'm at minimum focus distance. The wall is roughly around 7 to 8 feet away from me. And so I just want to give those people that do interviews, if you're looking for a headshot, a B-roll shot, this is the type of lens compression you'll be expecting from this lens. So just want to point that out there. Just want to give you guys some variety instead of always just, doing some crazy epic, backdrop. This is only 8 feet away from me. So this is the type of blur you'll get in your video. So there we go. And of course, I saved the best for last. On the left is the final output. On the right is the autofocus tracking. In this scene, I'm using the sun as a distraction. And so with that in mind, the autofocus still seems to snap on my face just fine. And in this scene, I'm moving away from the sun, of course, and it's seen to focus on me just fine. So there we go. And of course, I'm trying to see if I could trick it or not. But I think I broke the minimum focus distance in that part right there. But yeah, I broke the minimum focus distance. My bad. But here's another scene. I'm just walking towards the camera. And it seems to track me just fine, actually. So in terms of autofocus tracking, I don't think I'll have any issue if I'm just filming myself. It'll just track my face. And here is me just walking towards the camera. You get to see when the autofocus starts to track on my face. So there we go. I would say autofocus on this lens works pretty well. So just wrap things up, the Sirui 40mm T1.8 anamorphic lens for the Nikon Z mount. Here are my thoughts about the lens since I don't have another lens to compare it to. Number one, the lens has autofocus, which is a huge plus because we all know that the anamorphic lenses on the market, it's all manual focus. And if you want autofocus on those manual focus lens, you could get yourself a DJI LiDAR attachment to get autofocus, but the Sirui 40mm T1.8 anamorphic lens do have autofocus from the get-go. So that is pretty cool. Now, number two, the anamorphic flaring in this lens. Most of the anamorphic lenses out there that are very obnoxious with the blue lines, yeah, those are kind of played out. I like the way Sirui implement these flare lines in their lens because it's very subtle. It depends on the intensity of the light. So it doesn't matter how far or close you are. If the source is pretty bright, you'll get those crazy lines. If the source is not that bright, you won't get much of those lines. So you get a lot of variations of these flare lines in the lens, which is a huge plus in my book because we all seen the movies where they overplay the blue lines, the flare lines. So just want to point that out. I like variations with these anamorphic flare lines in this lens. So number three, I do enjoy the aperture clicks, the focus ring, they all geared up, everything's good to go. It's all pure metal. It has, I don't know why it has a rubber gasket at the end of the lens, but I don't see anywhere that says it's weather resistant. So there we go. I just want to point that out there for you guys. I don't know if that's a pro or con. I guess it's a pro since they don't talk about it in having it, but you do have some sort of weather resistant at the end of the lens. So there we go. And now for some cons that I'm trying to think from my experience in using this lens. Number one, here is one of those cons that I'm scratching my head about. I already talked to Sirui about this. I wish we could get into the full frame mode like the Sony models, because in the Sony Sirui models, you could get into the full frame mode, which will give you slight vignetting. And so with that said, if you have the Nikon one, is pure Super 35, you can't get into full frame mode. And if this is the last review I ever do for Sirui, you know what happened. Number 2, the autofocus motor can get really loud at f22.
f22.
I don't know why it does that on my copy. By the way, my copy is a sample copy, so this could be all fixed in the actual production copy. But when I'm shooting at f22, which I don't think a lot of people do actually, so this probably no one cares. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Definitely click like and subscribe. And yes, I guess I'll see you guys in the next one. Yeah, I'm so confused about this review because there's only one lens. I usually do 2 lenses. Anyways, take it easy. Peace.